One, greetings from Institute for Sustainable Communities. We'll wait a bit for a minute or so for everyone to join in, and then we'll start.
Great.
Okay, I think we'll go ahead. We are delighted to welcome you for the session on strengthening the decentralized or the distributed renewable energy systems. We'll call it DRE for to save time in rural India. That we are hosting with the Rockefeller Foundation. We would like to thank the Nudge Foundation and Peace India for supporting us putting up this session. I am Megha Nath, Project Officer from the Institute for Sustainable Communities, Energy and Environment team. While we wait for everyone to settle in, we would like to open the session with a poll to familiarize with the need for DRE systems in India. I have Huren with me, who will handle things back end. Huren, can we have the poll, please? So the question is, what are the key barriers to transitioning and transforming towards a green grid in India? I'll give you maybe about a few seconds to answer the question. You can answer all the questions, it's a multiple choice question, so you can answer as many as possible. You'll see the polls on the right hand side in the panel. All right. So I see that everybody is quite familiar with this topic, and it's great that we have an audience who knows quite a bit about this topic. The correct answers are inadequate and overburdened infrastructure, and increasing power demands. So before we go forward, few housekeeping rules. We'll request all attendees to remain in listen-only mode while we speak. Today's presentation is being and will be shared with the registered participants. Please use the question tab to type in your comments or questions during the webinar. We will have a Q&A session at the end of the panel discussion. To begin, I would like to invite Ms. Dion Ferris, President and CEO of Institute for Sustainable Communities. Dion is an environmental lawyer, racial social justice practitioner, and a system thought leader. She began her career at EPA, founded the Sustainable Community Development Group, and was the VP for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion at the National Audubon Society. Sorry. So over to you, Ms. Ferris.
Thank you so much, Megha. Greetings, everyone. I'm Dion Ferris, President of the Institute for Sustainable Communities. On behalf of the Institute, I would like to thank the Rockefeller Foundation, the Nudge Foundation, Chase, and all of the partners of this Charcha event for providing such a lively platform to advance these important conversations. I'm thrilled to be invited to open this important conversation today and introduce our esteemed panel of experts. First, let me take a few moments to set the stage for our conversation. At the Institute for Sustainable Communities, our mission is helping local leaders and communities around the world address environmental, economic, and social impacts and building a healthy and peaceful future shaped and shared by all. We're aligned in spirit and in vision with the Charcha ideals, and I'd like to take a moment to talk about our alignment. Over the last 30 years, the Institute has led more than 130 transformative, community-driven, and locally driven projects in 31 countries, and all of them have helped surface locally relevant and internationally scalable solutions. we convene and collaborate with cross-sector, interdisciplinary stakeholders whose decisions, budgets, investments, and power affect the environment, community health, and resiliency. We pinpoint the communities, the countries, the governments, the regions, the cities, and major corporate brands that are grappling with the most greenhouse gas and pollution emissions. We prioritize the places and populations where energy efficiency, natural resources conservation, technological and financial interventions will produce the most benefits. Keeping an eye on large-scale, meaningful impact, the Institute has worked with local partners, assisting them in many ways. For example, we've helped over 60,000 factories operationalize environmental governance standards. We've supported 150,000 smallholder and women farmers in learning and implementing regenerative agriculture practices. We facilitated climate action planning in more than a dozen large cities and 500 counties, mobilizing over 130 million US dollars in public and private capital. In the light of this work, and in the light of the Institute's mission, we are thrilled to join the Rockefeller Foundation and the partners of this event today. The release of the United Nations IPCC report this week and the call for Code Red by 14,000 scientists alerts the world once again with a clarion call to tackle the urgent and immediate causes and effects of climate change. As we know, India and South Asia are among the most vulnerable regions to adverse impacts of climate change. There are large coastal populations and diverse climatic zones with significant dependencies on monsoon-led agrarian economies and relatively inequitable development. The fact is that moving away from fossil fuels and increasing electrification by tapping into cleaner sectors is easier said than done, especially when it comes to population groups that are the hardest hit by climate change impacts. As we know, more than 300 million people lack access to a clean, continuous, high-quality supply of electricity, and that leaves rural populations no choice except to turn to unsustainable fossil fuel sources. Additionally, immense opportunities in the rural economy remain unfulfilled due to lack of reliable clean energy supply. For example, less than 10% of India's farm produce is processed for further productive uses, compared to over 90% in developed economies, and that results in high amounts of food waste and loss. Apropos of this conversation today, energy access is an important nexus between equitable economic development and climate change mitigation. Distributed renewable energy, or in simpler terms, renewable energy-based mechanisms that are local, off-grid, and closer to source location, look like solutions that carry the additional benefit of the resulting technological advancements, which in turn could support a variety of revenue-generating applications, including food processing, textiles, cold chains, spices, and more. Distributed renewable energy, or DRE, looks like a very important tool to advance equitable climate action and sustainable development with multiple benefits across farming and other livelihoods, including enhanced access to reliable energy sources and reductions in environmental impacts. This session will lay the foundation for how energy access can foster greater shared prosperity. And I'm glad to say that's entirely in keeping with what I believe is our shared vision of energy for all, energy development, and energy for equitable climate actions. We have an eminent group of panelists gathered here contributing deep expertise on how we can advance energy democracy. We'll hear from them about local governance and leadership best practices, and the ways that distributed energy can transform villages into enterprising hubs. We'll hear about financing and markets and ways that enhanced access to capital and business models can boost micro enterprises and service demand, and in turn, address equitable development opportunities. I am so pleased today to introduce this esteemed panel of experts. You will hear from Dr. Debajit Palit, Director of the Energy and Resources Institute. We'll hear from Mr. Jaideep Mukherjee, Head of Smart Power India, a Rockefeller Foundation-driven entity. We'll hear from Ms. Smita Rakshi, Director of Clean Energy and Climate Action at Social Alpha, and leaders in the distributed renewable energy space, Mr. Vijay Bhaskar, Managing Director at Hamara Grid. And now I'll hand it back to my colleague, Miga, to open this discussion. Thank you, Miga.
Thank you. We missed out on Mr. Advait Joshi, so just that too. Thank you, Ms. Ferris, for elaborating on the significance of DRE initiatives in India, especially in the rural regions where DRE can be the tool to meet climate ambition while encouraging social equity and climate justice too. I would now like to put up another poll on the current status of DRE as we go to the panelists going forward. So the question is, which sector, according to you, is currently implementing a majority of DRE initiatives in India? Few minutes for this also. Yes, the guess is quite right. So currently, the household and the residential sector are using DRE systems most in India, and there's a lot of scope to go to the other sectors also. And that's why we have this great esteemed panel of experts, where we'll hear from them on how this panel is going to help us is it's going to envision a pathway towards developing a comprehensive DRE system across the country, investigating it from different perspectives. So to begin with, we have Ms. Smita Rakesh, who leads clean energy and climate action portfolios at Social Alpha. Social Alpha is an initiative to drive economic growth, social justice, and climate action through the power of entrepreneurship and market creating innovations. Smita has been deeply engaged with the global energy access ecosystem for more than 13 years. She will elaborate for us how villages can be transformed using DRE into enterprising hubs for social equity and throw some light on private sector engagement. Going forward, we will have Mr. Jaideep Mukherjee, who has a goal to accelerate electricity to unserved villages in India. As the CEO of Climate Power India, he leads the India-based work for the smart power for rural development programs with the Rockefeller. With over 30 years of experience, Mr. Jaideep showcases a strong track record in areas and expansion of new products for development of consumer goods and social enterprises. With his vision, we would learn how mini grids are a reliable option for enhancing the experience with energy access in a clean and sustainable manner. Sorry. Then we have Mr. Jaideep Patil, fellow and a director of the Rural Energy and Livelihood Divisions in Delhi, and has about 24 years of experience working with projects related to renewable energy technologies and DRE. He has led projects in over 15 countries across South and Southeast Asia and suburban Africa, with more than 70 research publications, and a master degree in physics with a PhD in energy policy. He has written widely on energy access, DRE, rural electrification, and energy gender poverty nexus. he would be able to give us a policy recommendation to overcome barriers to electrify rural regions through DRE. Then we have with us Colonel Vijay Bhaskar, co-founder of Hamara Grid in Calcutta, which specializes in supporting rural community access to energy through mini grids again. Colonel Bhaskar has previously served as the MD for Melinda Sustainable Environment and CEO of the Coromandel Energy. With his leadership at Hamara Grid, currently with a spread of over 40 village-wide mini grids, establishing 1,000 DRE-based rural development hubs in Northeast and helping the World Bank funded National Electric Plan in Myanmar. We would like Colonel Bhaskar to throw light on how DRE is a tool for social equity in rural India. And finally, Mr. Advait Joshi, CEO of Clean, an industry accelerator representing 200 plus decentralized renewable energy organizations in India, committed to clean energy integration for sustainable development in underserved communities. With Mr. Joshi's vision that localized clean energy democratizes the power of choice for better healthcare, education, livelihood, and transforms cities to sustainable societies. We want to understand from him how we uplift communities from poverty and combat climate by leveraging DRE um, systems and products. So, my first question, I would like to open with Ms. Rakesh, and I would like to hear from her and elaborate on how can DRE systems or products be used to transform villages into enterprising hubs for social equity. Also, since we have many private players entering this market, are there any suggestions from your experience on how villages that lack energy access invite private sector engagement?
Thank you. Thanks, Mega, and thanks to the organizers for having me here. Since I have the privilege of opening this discussion, this very critical discussion, maybe I'll take the advantage of saying a few things, just putting across a few messages which we all know, but are very critical to be underlined to begin with. This discussion is very important and rightly placed. Why? Because as critical as climate action is, we all understand that for a country like India, in our context, we cannot. It's incomplete. Climate action discussion is incomplete without this part of it, and energy access at the core of it. But whether we are talking of livelihoods in agriculture, access of energy for livelihoods, that whole periphery of the rural engagement, which needs to be at the core and has to be centralized in India if we are talking climate action through clean energy. The DRE sector has also been at a disadvantage of often being competed against the grid, and also struggling with the uncertainties that come with this sort of being pitted against the grid kind of power supply, whereas it's actually only complementing to the grid. And that's been one of the struggles in terms of business models and risk estimation with respect to any kind of decentralized renewable energy solution, whether it's individual, standalone, or it's a mini grid solution. And I think with the increasing electrification in India, it's all the more coming under the scanner and running a disadvantage. But at the same time, even today, if we honestly look and introspect, DRE is not going to lose its relevance in any time soon. For various reasons. We, of course, know that there are geographies that are going to be inaccessible. Colonel Bhaskar is joining us from Nagaland. And it's not just about states which are far off and haven't had, the kind of mainstream electrification for years in the past, but also about pockets within states that often have been counted on the top of, the electrification list, right? So there's going to be inaccessibility in terms of geography, given the nature, the topography of our country. There's going to be always a question of quality and reliability of power. And I'm sure, both Colonel Bhaskar and Joydeep and everybody, I think, on the panel can talk about how that has become one of the most important aspects of DRE. It's the reliability. It's the reliability in terms of time and quality that communities count upon, even if they have access to the grid electricity at the same time. Thirdly, it's also about the growing aspirations and demands and factoring that in terms of ramping up. Right, so the modular, decentralized energy's nature sort of helps factor in, because as soon as energy is introduced in an area which has otherwise been energy starved, needs and aspirations grow exponentially, and rightly so. And therefore, that needs to be factored in, and that is where DRE has an edge over the grid power, and is going to play a strong role in complementing grid supply. But finally, when we speak of livelihoods, it's also the case for productive applications. Grid electrification also has this challenge in many areas of being single phase. So whether you talk about irrigation and farm-based energy requirements, or we talk about livelihoods which are non-farm, or whether we are talking about value-added food processing kind of livelihood activities, all of these sometimes require a power consumption which is not just single phase, and therefore again the whole decentralized energy powered productive application load is something that becomes critical. So we definitely understand, and it's important for every player in the sector to understand that DRE has a role to play and is here to stay. How do we de-risk the business models in order to make sure? It's been decades of India championing, at least a part of Indian investment sector as well as the funding sector championing DRE, but it's still struggling in case of being investable and establishing business models that are less riskier. And I think that's where we'll all have to play a very, very critical role going forward as well. I think, a few things that I want to talk about, and we've recently, a couple of years ago, launched a livelihoods and energy program, energy access and livelihoods program, supported by the IKEA Foundation and in partnership with Selco Foundation, CINI, and Tata Trust. The idea was to exactly look at change the whole game around grant funding and look at livelihoods and energy access, the nexus between energy and livelihoods from the point of view of sustainable business models. So how do we use grant funding in order to create models which are actually more enterprise driven and are sustainable and scalable on the ground, and gradually sort of wean off the grant support that they initially started with. And that's from that program, from Sustain Plus Energy Foundation, the new initiative that we've started, we've had several learnings. But the one that I will highlight the most, and I cannot emphasize any less, is that as actors in the sector, we've got to be honest in terms of the inputs that we put in and the outputs that we expect. Our theory of change or our expectations want impact in terms of inclusion, want impact in terms of gender, want impact in terms of people's livelihoods and quality of lives improving. But if we go with very restricted business models, if we go with and it's nobody's fault, but if we design it in a way that the business model is looking at the so-called low-hanging fruits, it ends up again not shaking the balance, right? So we enter a new geography, and let's understand that energy access is the introduction of energy into certain geographies is going to create a ripple effect. And if we are entering an area, a community where we all know that it's not a level playing field, if we are not going in with the intention of actual inclusion in terms of socio-economic inclusion, gender inclusion, and making sure that we're looking at access for all, it's still going to be a long time by the time we reach the sort of last person that we support, right? Essentially, the problem is that our business models are still designed with the intent to achieve quicker results, and the impact expectation is still trying to look at the bottom of the pyramid, a phrase that we're all very used to, it's a very prevalent phrase in our sector. So I think we all need to introspect in terms of what exactly are we feeding in to achieve that. Are we feeding in a risk appetite in terms of absorbing the kind of losses or the kind of risks and uncertainties that come with financial as well as otherwise, that come with entering a market that wasn't existing? And I think Megha mentioned in Social Alpha's introduction that we believe in market creating innovations, because we understand that these are problem statements that haven't been addressed for the longest time. And therefore, for an entrepreneur or for a new technology or for a private sector player to enter a market that doesn't exist, there is a need but is latent and doesn't exist, it's going to be a very risk-prone exercise. And therefore, unless it is supplemented by players and actors from the sector, it's not going to be a single-handed game. And finally, I just wanted to highlight three things which we believe are critical. if for from the community's perspective as well as from the perspective of private sectors entering newer areas and making sure that communities are integrated into the DRE landscape. One is technology and innovation. If we do not work on innovation that is embedded and factors in user preferences, we are actually losing the plot. The second is, of course, finance. Like I said, whether it's philanthropic capital or investment capital, needs to have a higher risk appetite and needs to have a very clear theory of change in terms of who do we want to impact. And the third is the intent for design. We have to know, are we actually there to just, sort of grow our business, or are we actually there to create the last mile impact? And I'll probably pause with that, but thank you very much for having.
Thank you so much, Ms. Rakesh, for sharing your experience and how DRE comes with its core benefits and establishing the role of inclusion and also suggesting ways to incorporate energy transition needs from the lens of a village. So, with these fascinating facts, I would now like to understand from Mr. Mukherjee what is the importance of mini grids in the energy access space, and also can you throw some light on how SBI designs its mini grids program in rural communities?
All right. Thank you, Megha, and good evening, everyone. Before I dive into Smart Power's DRE-led mini grid program, let me provide some context about India's electricity services and really frame the problem that we are trying to address through our DRE initiatives. Over the last few decades, India has made significant strides both on the generation side, including growth in renewable generations, as well as in the electricity grid expansion and connectivity. Thanks to the accelerated program over the last 7-8 years called the Subhagya program, the grid is omnipresent now everywhere in the rural, and nearly 100% household level connections have been achieved, and which we have witnessed during the 5-6 years of our groundwork. So these are extremely laudable achievements. India has more than adequate generation capacity. Currently, 55 to 60% of the generation capacity is being used, and there is a significant upside in terms of as electricity demand grows. But despite these laudable achievements, here is the paradox. Diesel consumption and diesel usage for electricity continues to be extremely high. In fact, I understand the figures are around between 35 to 45 billion liters of diesel usage. And the low income states have a even higher proportion of diesel usage. The diesel generator manufacturers are predicting sales growth of 12.5% compounded annually. So you have tremendous generation capacity, you have grid everywhere, and you also have this paradox of extremely high diesel usage continuing. Then comes another problem, which is the per capita electricity consumption, which we all agree is a close proxy to measuring economic progress of a community or a country. India's per capita electricity consumption is 1/3 of the world, and Indian rural electricity consumption is probably about 1/10 of the world. And no wonder, what you see there, you can easily correlate to the conditions and the economic conditions that are prevailing. So this brings us to, this is the paradox that we are looking at. And, in the survey that Smart Power India and Niti Aayog did across 10 states to survey a primary research to survey over 10,000 customers, households, as well as commercial and enterprise customers, we found that 40% of commercial and enterprise customers in UP, Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, and northeastern states, accounting for 45% of the country's population, 40% have not connected to the grid and are primarily reliant on diesel. And of the remaining 60%, only 10% have adequate electricity via the grid, which means more than 18 hours plus, the World Bank framework for electricity consumption. And 60% to 80% have just the tier one access, which is less than 12 hours and, 2 kilowatt connectivity, sometimes single phase. So you understand why so much diesel is being used, and this is where our program actually comes in, and the Smart Power program, which has been now in its sixth year, has built in partnership with about 10 private sector players about 500 mini grids, probably the largest portfolio of renewable energy mini grids anywhere in the world, and growing at the rate of 100, 200 in India every year. So these mini grids have served a key role in addressing, supplementing and bringing reliability, displacing diesel. But our program takes an holistic approach. We not only address the supply side, we look at how to expand enterprise activity. We look at how to bring in new enterprise development.
Okay, it seems that we've lost Mr. Mukherjee. Maybe we'll
About
let him
more than
finish.
25,000, more than more than 25,000. Excuse me, is there?
Sorry, we had lost you for a minute,
Sorry,
but please go ahead.
more than 25,000 CNI customers are connected to the. Are we connected now? Okay.
Yes,
So
yes,
more than
connected.
25,000. Yeah, more than 25,000 CNI customers are now connected. Or has eliminated diesel to the extent of, there's a elimination of 20,000 tons of CO2 per year from these mini grids. So this is, some of the critical, this explains why criticality of DRE solutions in the, the rural economy of India, not only driving the economy, creating justice in terms of electricity, but also the environmental impact side. And in course of our work in the rural areas, we recognize another opportunity for expanding our DRE work when we found that the customers with 5 to 10 to 20 kilowatt individual requirement cannot be serviced by the mini grids. And we are now about to launch expansion to our programs to drive solar rooftop for commercial and enterprise customers in the rural, because that market is constrained by, again, high risk, access to finance, and viable business model. So this is another addition to our DRE program that we are about to, bring on the road in the coming months. And again, pointing to the fact that how critical the DRE solutions are going to be, not only in just energy transition, but driving the economic progress of our rural communities. Thank you.
Thank you. This was great to know how mini grids bring into so many advantages to the communities, and really good plans that Smart Power India has to get this economic development run going on and bring opportunity to increase the per capita consumption and a more sustainable lifestyle. This makes me want to know how can we think of a bigger picture to advance energy democracy. And I will look up to Dr. Palit to explain to us if DRE can be the potential market instrument for India to meet its NDC and electrification goals, and if we can have any complementary policy suggestions to advance DRE initiatives too.
Thank you, Megha. So let me first congratulate all the stakeholders that we have achieved 100 gigawatt of renewable energy power in India. And many may not be knowing that it started with a DRE installation of a DRE system in 1981 in Masudpur village, which is now called Basant Kunj. Probably many in the ministry may not also be knowing that this one. So it's about 40 years of the DRE system, though we have achieved 100 gigawatt primarily because of the centralized renewable energy. But then it started with the DRE, and in fact, the electrification in India started in 1897 as, with the DRE solutions in the form of a micro hydropower project in Darjeeling. This one. So just wanted to build the context and this one. Now let's see what is happening now in India, as rightly pointed out by my previous speaker, Mr. Mukherjee. The near universal electricity access has been achieved with all villages claimed to have been electrified. There may be few hamlets here and there left. This one, and almost all households have been provided with the connection, and by end of 2020. This one, it was not in 2019 actually. By end of 2020, this has been achieved. This one. Now, ensuring reliable and affordable electricity is an ongoing task, and this is being done by most of the. It's a state's task, not the central government's task. And the central government is working with the states to achieve this milestone by 2022. If not by 2022, maybe by 2023, it should be achieved. Now, given this context, definitely we will ask to ourselves what is then the scope for DRE. This one, if we have already achieved village electrification, household electrification, electrification of public places, and all other stuff, then what is the scope for DRE? Now, I think it's extremely important that we have to go beyond the narrative of reliable supply to positively push DRE solutions. This is the first thing that we need to do, and there are stakeholders here who are pushing DRE solutions. I think everybody has to think about that. We should stop this narrative of unreliable power supply. We started with the narrative of not all villages are electrified. 5 years back, we used to discuss on that. The villages got electrified. Then we started the narrative of not all households are electrified. All households are now electrified. Tomorrow, the government will start, the discoms will start providing reliable power supply. What then you do? Don't you have a business model? One should ask oneself this question. Now, having said that, I certainly feel that DRE is most suitable not just for individual homes, given the new technologies that are evolving, and I'll come to that, but also for re-energizing livelihoods in the MSME sector, with clean energy for processing, with control on the control of the system is on the user. This one, so they know when to use it and how best to use it. This one. So this is extremely important. Why MSMEs? I am saying MSMEs are considered as the engines of growth, almost contributing 50% of India's total exports, employs more than 110 million people. But within the MSMEs, the first M is extremely important. The S and the last M is not that important. It's important, but they can themselves afford to have DRE or other solutions in their homes. So the micro enterprise, the home-based and cottage enterprise, which are almost 95% of the pie of the MSME pie, they don't have the capacity, they don't have the finance, affordable credit, skills, competitiveness, and resulting in low income and low productivity. And because of that, they cannot afford to have a DRE systems on their own in their place. So what should we do? So there agencies are required. This one is specialized agencies like my organization, TERI, is undertaking some task on that, are required, who can help these micro enterprises and home and cottage industries to assess the scope of DRE in their establishment, what type of solutions should be provided, what should be not just the technical model, but also the institutional model and the financial model. Now, I'll give an example. Most of these enterprises are not registered. Now, if you're not registered, the scheduled bank will not give you loan, irrespective of whether the government has a scheme or has don't have a scheme. Now, what do you do then? This one. Now, if you go to the other financing agency in the rural market, we are just doing a study, and we found that the financing rate ranges from 14% to 18%. So that is not an affordable finance. Or this one, whereas the government finance might be around 7 to 8%. But for that, you have to have a registration, you have to have the ITR, income tax return, you have to have the SME registration. All these things are required. These are the areas where I think, just without directly going into putting up DRE systems, I think we have to also see that these are the other associated things which needs to be addressed first, and they should be brought into a collective. We don't have a collective of or association or in the clusters who are empowered, who can take decisions, who are aware about the technologies. This one, so we are not working with them. So these are the areas that we need to start working with them, so that we can push the DRE systems in the different micro enterprise clusters. We did a study with support from Shakti Foundation last year, and this year we are doing with IKEA Foundation, where it's found that many of these clusters has huge potential for implementing DRE systems. Their load requirement is something like say from 50 watt to maybe 1 kilowatt or 2 kilowatt, which are extremely this one with the DRE systems can be an extremely useful for at that range. You don't need because DREs are in kilowatt, and this requirement in these micro enterprises are also kilowatt. So it's a clearly matching the load with the demand. This one, both are matching, the supply and the demand are matching. So, but then you need to have build on the associated things that are extremely important. This is number one. Number two, for the now, what do you do to achieve that? So I give a 4D type of solution for specifically focusing on the micro enterprise sector. So before I do that, now in most of these enterprise and in the rural areas, they call what they say is that for them, whether it is DRE or the grid supply, it doesn't matter to them. Now it's what they call it equivalent electricity. That means we talk about reliability, but at the same time we don't talk about adequacy of electricity. So we have undertaken surveys in the village, and we found that both are equally important. So can you provide the adequate electricity that can meet your demand, and at the same time also provide reliable and affordable electricity? So all three are, I think, extremely important and equally important. Now, having said that, I propose a 4D type of solution, that what we are implementing at the field is that first you have to have discussion with these your stakeholders, whether it is micro enterprise or the cottage industries or the households. Then you have to develop the necessary techno-institutional models. Just alone technical model is not going to serve the purpose, because institutions are extremely important. And if we have to develop local institutions who can create the ecosystems in the villages or in the rural areas to provide the necessary sale and service and handholding support to these enterprises or the consumers, then you demonstrate the technology. Now we are finding it difficult because the funding agency is not providing us support for hardware. Now how do I demonstrate a technology? Now we have prospective consumers in the MSME sector or the micro enterprise sector, but I cannot demonstrate a technology which might cost me as a lakh or 2 lakhs. This one, no? So that I can convince the bank. The bank is ready to finance, but only after seeing the demonstration. The user is ready to take the technology, but only after seeing the demonstration. So how do I do that? So this is an area where I think we need to start working. This one, the funding agency also need to be cognizant of this requirement and start also fund demonstration. And then, of course, finally the dissemination of the solutions. And if you do this 4D, the fifth you will automatically come. That's the dividend. You will automatically get the dividend from this 4Ds. So I think this could be the roadmap for the household sector. I can visualize a solution at which I have written. Probably next week it will be published. This one, no, that I visualize a solution where in India we are going to, with advent of technology and what you call it, this one, Internet of Things and other. So you have microgrids. You have actually different models like peer-to-peer models, the prosumer-based models, this one of the individual systems at the household. Mr. Mukherjee rightly mentioned about in villages there are consumers who need to have 1 kilowatt, 2 kilowatt systems, maybe more than that. At the you have the solar packs in their house. These are all interconnected with the microgrid, the type of microgrid that Mr. Mukherjee is implementing under the SPI is implementing. And these are interconnected with them with modern technology. You can actually, each one can speak with the other. this one, and these microgrids are then connected with the main grid. This one, so the main grid actually becoming from a distribution grid to a sub-transmission grid. This one, and with technology, you can actually there can also be trading in the different partners. So I think whether it is 5 years or 10 years down the line, I don't know, but definitely this is something that the electricity market or the electricity system is going to see in future. Whether it is in India or in other places, definitely it is going to happen, and that would truly empower the consumers because they would then take a decision on how much electricity to use, for what purpose I should use it, and at what time I should use it, and accordingly the tariff would be decided. And that would be the day when we can really see tell that yes, we have provided universal electricity access, and consumers are taking the decision. Thank you.
Thank you. This is wonderful. Thank you for looping in everything for us so wonderfully. I would now request Mr. Colonel Bhaskar to comment on the considerations to strengthen the market transparency for DRE system to boost rural infrastructure finance and market linkages. Over to you, Colonel Bhaskar.
Vijay, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I was saying, I can see Megha looking a little worried about time, so I'm going to make it really quick. And I just cover 4 or 5 very important aspects. Most of the stuff has been covered by the previous speakers. I think we are all aware of what's happening over there. I'll just cover scale, the initial buy-in, which they talked about, policy, finance, technical innovation, sophistication, training skills, and impact. So I'll be quick about it. So the minimum scale required for mini grids, I'm talking about mini grid context now in the DRE space. Minimum required to make it viable, sustainable, is about 50 to 100 mini grids, depending on what level of what kind of sustainability you want to achieve. And it has to be done in a very compact geography. So scale is required to keep capex down. Compact geography is required to keep overheads costs down. So you can imagine if somebody wants to get into the mini grid space, 50 to 100 mini grids would translate to almost like $5 to $10 million investment. You should be ready to come in with that, and without that, it's really difficult for the developer to really sustain over a period of time. Second, Devaji touched upon it. Others have also touched upon it. It's initial buy-in, extremely important. So we need to engage with the stakeholders, engage with the communities that we're going to serve, get them to understand what really the model is, negotiate the tariff that's going to work for them and for you, and try and see how this entire thing is going to be not just a pure energy service model, but also something that's going to help them in livelihoods and a lot of other things. So unless economic development happens, really the mini grid model is not going to be sustainable. The other about policy, we talk a lot about policy, but not having a government policy in a state is sometimes quite an okay thing to get started with. What is the policy going to tell you? It's going to tell you that here you can come into my state and build mini grids. We recognize that, which is fine. We don't really need them to say that because the Electricity Act anyway allows you to, after permission of the village community, the village council or the Gram Sabha, to set up a mini grid. So you don't really need the state to give you a policy on that. And then there are today, as somebody brought out, almost every village is connected to the main grid. And therefore, that stuff that we worried about, that, okay, what if the grid comes, is no longer there. And as somebody said, we need to build a business model around the grid being there and the unreliable and a poor quality grid being there. So, and we really don't have to worry about the policy being there, because when we went into Jharkhand, there was no policy. There's something happening over there now. They are trying to put together a policy, but there was always support from the government whenever you wanted on solutions, especially to do with livelihoods, cold chains, and agriculture. We're now working in Nagaland. The government there's no policy over there, but the government is absolutely welcoming and says that they are going to sort of help us, set up DRE solutions in the state. But where really the policy matters, and most of the state policies do not address, is the fact that the other infrastructure that is there in the villages, which is around health, primary health centers, schools, street lights, all other infrastructure that is there, which is not covered under the policy. So you may set up, they allow you to set up a mini grid, but then what happens to all the other stuff? Because they're all dependent on other kinds of system which are unreliable. But now the Nagaland government is planning to work to help us to integrate this entire thing into an integrated model, which is what I think the policy should address. Next is about finance. Now, there is, as we said, the DRE sector is not viable as a pure energy service provider model. It has to, this energy has to contribute towards the economic development of the village. It has to encourage livelihoods. It has to encourage productive loads. And there is a different kind of an intervention required for you to generate demand and sustain it going forward. And therefore, this soft part of the project has to be on grants. And therefore, there has to be a blended finance that has to come in terms of grants, debt, and equity. And therefore, this organization structure that we have in terms of just a private limited company doing it is not going to work. You will need a hybrid model, for-profit working with a not-for-profit, which can receive these funds for the softer parts of the project. Next is technological sophistication and innovation. The operational expenditure can only be kept down if you have a very sophisticated system to monitor data acquisition, data monitoring, data analytics, and link it with the user, the end part of it, which is the smart meters. And then these both should be able to talk to each other for you to really take decisions how to grow demand. So unless that can happen, the operational costs are going to be extremely high. The last part is as you grow beyond 30, 40 grids, there's a huge pressure on human resource skill building, and this is something that you need to address because the number of moving parts that become very huge because you need to develop social skills for your people. You need to develop the technical skills, and this has to go hand in hand with micro enterprise building. And therefore, that same person, you can't have different specialists roaming around over there. The operation costs overheads are going to be extremely high, and the skill development is going to be a very important part. Last and not the least, unless you have an independent impact assessment of the work that you're doing, the stakeholders in terms of whether it's the government, the investors, the grant makers, and you yourself are not going to understand what exactly is happening over there. And therefore, right at the outset, an impact assessment component has got to be built into this. Thank you so much, Megha.
Keeping that so crisp and for giving us these eye-opening reality checks of what's happening on the ground. With this, I would want to invite Mr. Joshi to elaborate on how DRE products can help on-ground users to leverage their socio-economic status, and you support. I mean, because you support so many DRE players, can you also throw some light on, the policy recommendations to strengthen the ecosystem and keeping in mind climate justice? So yes, over to
Absolutely.
you.
Thanks, Megha. And it's wonderful to hear everybody before me. I think they have covered a lot of different segments under DRE and its journey up till now over here. But like you said, I think I would like to mix climate, economics, and social part together because that's where energy plays a very critical role, and that's why at Clean we believe that the amount of work that is being done by our members or any DRE practitioner out there sort of in a way democratizes the choice. The choice is not about democratizing whether I have access to energy or not, whether it is good quality or not, whether it is sufficient or not. I think it creates a choice for an individual, a family, an enterprise, or any other institution to really make a choice on how they want to grow using this demand for energy. And that is something that we have seen that decentralized renewable energy really provides because it can be easily customized to it. We have seen some very good examples on field by work done by mini grid players, microgrid players, standalone players, solar or any other different DRE technology where simple economic benefit that comes to the end user is one, of course, extended hours of business. But over the last few years, we have also seen that DRE has also extended the overall footprint of that particular enterprise or ability for those enterprises or even individuals to really grow in the socio-economic culture. Take an example of another work that one of our members has done on the solar dryers, where installing a solar dryer has not just increased the operating hours for them to dry, let's say, cardamom or pineapple or even meat, but that has given them the ability to increase their income to about, by about 7,000 per month, bring down the entire ROI for, getting financing for such equipments to as down as, 1 or 2 years compared to, what it would have been earlier, up to about 3 to 4 years. And that is where we are seeing, strong change on the ground when we look at DRE socio and economic part of it. Another segment in socioeconomics which we don't really look very keenly is also the gender equity part of it, and we have seen that DRE has played a significant role even there. We have seen again several examples, right from blacksmith to potteries to sewing machines and spinning and reeling machines, where because of the burden, or I would say the drudgery that was involved previously, a DRE solution or adapted solution, removes that drudgery and sort of allows both genders to play equally in terms of creating better economic opportunities for themselves and sort of grow in that society. So again, I come back to the whole thought about that DRE. I agree. There is grid, and what role will DRE play? DRE will play this role of creating new options and opportunities, like we have, fortunately, sitting in large cities. Today, during this pandemic, we all are sitting in good cities, and we have an option of A hospital or B hospital where we want to go. But when you think about rural communities, they have to think about number of kilometers afar that a rural hospital probably would have energy at that given point in a more qualitative aspect as well, and the kind of facilities that the rural healthcare clinic can afford because of that access to energy, or the kind of infrastructure that they can afford compared to the energy requirements that they have. So that is where I believe there is a strong role that clean energy can play, is playing, and sort of is where it can expand. I'll touch upon policy a little bit later, at the maybe the last minute of it. But when I think about looking at how climate plays, or DRE plays a big role in climate action, a large part of DRE examples we have been seeing is in the plains of India, if I have to say. But the moment you look at coastal regions, the moment you look at the mountain terrains or the hilly terrains, where climate impact is really creating a lot more damage, in a way, I believe climate justice can be reduced by introducing more strongly DRE solutions. Why should just a coastal community or a hilly terrain lose their livelihoods, lose their loved ones, their livestock, their entire life quality, because climate change is affecting a larger world, and not really getting affected similarly in urban areas like where we are. So I think climate justice, DRE can play a role by introducing DRE solutions, in those areas. So be it for, I think even in the previous panel we saw how small landholders can really use DRE to focus on creating better yield and better output and better income and better economic and social value for themselves. Similarly, if I think about the overall quality of life as well, where even something as basic as heating systems, demand for that is going to grow as we see the effects of climate change increase. Either it will be a rapid or increased in lower temperatures, or really harsh summers, and that is where you will see more and more demand for energy really come through, where DRE again can play a role in a very decentralized manner. uh, Keeping an eye on the time, a quick 4 points for what we believe that policy can bring a change. Up till now, policy has been focused on Ministry of Power or MNRE, with the focus point of getting recognition for DRE. But I think there is high time that it has to move beyond energy ministries or other departments. We need to make sure that Ministry of Rural Development, healthcare, agriculture, textile, everybody, MOEFCC, need to recognize the potential that DRE brings onto the table, and both long-term potential and short-term potential. I think the other big move or activity that Clean is also involved along with its partners and members is to sort of also narrow down that conversation from state level engagement of its energy departments or SRLMs to at the district or even the panchayat level, to make sure that whatever plans they are developing, whatever growth activities they are planning, DRE becomes a crucial aspect of that decision making, a crucial aspect of budget allocation. Now, those kind of policy initiatives will also bring confidence for financial institutions, donors, CSR as well, to really come and invest and participate in it. And that is where I also come back to one small point about finance, how finance needs to be completely rethought through, restructured, so that it can understand that risk is not just about ROI and repayments. There is a huge risk behind that impact that climate change is going to create on many of these vulnerable communities, which also need to be factored when they look at the overall risk and what DRE sort of brings onto the table to mitigate those risks. So with that, I think that's a quick snapshot and run through of what at Clean we believe in, and what we have been looking at when we think about democratizing energy, when we think about climate, social and economic aspects of it. I
All
hope
right.
that's helpful.
That's great. We have almost come to the end, and I was just thinking if anybody has any parting comments. We do have a couple of questions coming in about the problem of barriers against energy storage, and how can we have effective gender-based equality. So, any thoughts on any of these points, or any parting comments from anyone? Dion, Jaydeep, Mr. Patil, Mr. Bhaskar, Advait, or Ms. Rakesh.
I could quickly talk about the gender inclusion part. Maybe I think it's complex. Gender is one of the most complex areas. But I think, like I was saying, the whole integrating gender and having a clear understanding of what the barriers are. We've seen projects where it has helped break the gender barrier, and we've seen projects where it's only sort of intensified the gap. And therefore, being aware of what the community's barriers in terms of gender are, and trying to intervene in a way that you're not sort of ending in a conflict situation, but you're actually trying to plug those gaps. Also, investing in the entire value chain with respect to gender, and not just women as.
That's great. Thank you so much. Does anyone else want to say anything?
Yeah, let me just put forward about the question on the organized market perspective for DRE. This one, I think before we start thinking about the organized market perspective, definitely it is much more organized now than 10 years back. Now we have Clean, Advait is here, who are representing the different DRE stakeholders across the value chain. So it is getting organized. But what is two things, as somebody who has been working in the DRE sector for almost 24 years now, this one I'd like to put forward two things. One is that we are very emotional, this one, and I think all DRE stakeholders or renewable energy stakeholders are emotional. Instead of being emotional, we have to be practical. Now, when we say we have to be practical. We should not compare the best anecdotal case of DRE with the worst anecdotal case of grid. Now we need to do empirical surveys of DRE installation, which is there is no empirical survey of DRE installations ever done in India, except some of the evaluation studies of projects and programs that stakeholders might have done. Now, if we do a cross-country empirical assessment of the DRE installation and try to learn lessons, not to find out faults, but try to learn lessons from them, what has worked, what has not worked, this one without comparing it with the grid, probably we can this would be a great way forward to understand what can make DRE work in a situation where the grid, I'm presuming, is giving completely reliable 24/7 electricity. Still we have to work there, because DRE, there is a renewable energy element, there is an empowerment element, there is a democratization element, this one, and because of all these reasons that we have to make the DRE work, irrespective whether the grid is working or not working. Now, how do we do that? And we can only do that when we stop comparing it with the grid. So my PhD thesis was on the towards convergence of grid and DRE solution for sustainable rural electrification. So we have to see how both can coexist in the best form, taking advantage of each of this one a solution, this one. So irrespective of whether the 24/7 reliable electricity or not, wherever you can put up DRE solutions, we should try to put up DRE solutions, this one. And if it is not possible, for example, in large industries, then definitely the grid is a solution, or a large solar power plant is a solution. So we have to think in that way instead of comparing. Thanks.
All right. Thank you. I will now have to we will now have to leave this platform as we don't have much time. Lastly, I would, this is very encouraging to have leaders who can make us feel that tomorrow India would be a place where there'll be where inaccessible energy will, not be a problem really. I would finally like to thank our patient listeners, our audience, and all our speakers, and our co-hosts and partners, Sarang, Sanat, Abhinav, Priyank, and special thanks to Mani and our ISL team. Who has helped us, who has helped and done all last minute changes and been up to this. Thank you so much. This was a great session. We'll end now. Thank you.